Okay, so today guys, I am going to be explaining and modelling for you the triple pass reading strategy, which is a strategy we want you to be using for your language analysis, SAC, and for your exam later in the year. It's not a strategy that's just for persuasive texts. It's something that you can use across the board. You can take this into other subjects. You can, take this beyond school. So we've got 3 steps. I'm going to model each of them for you. Our first one is about previewing, looking at the text, not really reading it in depth, but getting a sense of where it starts, where it ends, and what kind of information we might find in there. Our second step, or our second pass, is close reading, where we actually read it and start looking for things like techniques and so on. Our third pass is comparing. Okay, we're looking for anything in there that we can compare to the other article, or anything that we could potentially compare to other knowledge that we've got. So first pass, read the top of the text. Okay, I'm going to look at the title or the headline. I'm going to look at the publication details. I'm going to look at the first paragraph. I'm going to look at the first paragraph because that is hopefully going to tell me what the contention is. So, letter to the editor, published in the Herald Sun on the 8th of November 2016. Gives me a text type, gives me the source, gives me the date. Nuclear Hazelwood's your title. What's Hazelwood? Let's hope it's in the article. Yep. What a waste, shutting down the Hazelwood power plant because it burned coal to heat water to make steam to drive the generators that make our electricity. With 21st century updated tech, we can produce electricity cheaper than with coal and with no greenhouse gases. Alright, so based on this opening kind of paragraph or 2 paragraphs and the heading, it looks like the author is making or contending that rather than shutting down the Hazelwood power plant because it used a kind of outdated technology to generate electricity, we should be updating it with modern tech, with modern nuclear tech. So there's our kind of top of the article. Next, I'm going to read the bottom of the text. The reason for this is because publication details might be there. There might be things like comments down there that I need to be aware of, and often the last paragraph reinforces the intro or restates what we found in the introduction. So what I'm looking for is, does the contention that I've identified up here, is it going to reappear here? Okay, because if it does, that's confirmation for me as the reader that I've identified it correctly. So remember, we stopped using horses when we realised petrol was safe to use and when handled correctly. Alright, that looks like a quite different sentence. At first glance, that doesn't match at all. But if I break it down into the ideas, it matches really closely. Using horses is the equivalent of burning coal to generate electricity. Okay, you've got 2 outdated technologies here. When we realised petrol was safe to use, that's your equivalent of the updated nuclear technology. Okay, so that's confirmation for me that that's probably our contention. Almost definitely that we need to be updating the plant with a more modern technology. Next thing, I'm going to skim read the paragraphs and any subheadings. There's no subheadings here, but obviously in something like an opinion piece that you might find on the web, you've got all sorts of different things. You've got images, you've got hyperlinks, you've got captions, you've got subheadings, you've got all sorts of different stuff. You've got comments at the bottom. There's heaps of different stuff that you need to be aware of as you read through that you can kind of find without even reading. So, as I skim, well, there's nothing there. I'm also looking for maybe graphs or tables. Do that skim, there's nothing really there. There's the means I can do the next bit. Any unfamiliar words? Maybe decel plant, but I don't think I need to know that. Text type was pretty obvious. Letter to the editor. Sorry. And contention, arguments, issue. Well, okay, here, this is where I can start to skim. So I noticed that he mentioned cheapness earlier, and I noticed that he mentioned safe in the conclusion kind of sentence. So if I just skim through, I want to see if I can find these again. We see a lot of like nuclear technology, nuclear energy, educating the public. Ooh, oh, there you go. So safe to use. So safety is being repeated from down here. Accidents, that's about safety again. There's cheapness. Current supplies of electricity. So it looks like he's making some arguments about the cheapness of the technology and the safety of it. Possible audiences, well, I saw we can produce electricity. He's talking about Australians here, obviously. But if we want to narrow it in, people in Sydney don't read the Herald Sun. People in Western Australia don't care about Hazelwood. And people in Queensland might be less inclined to listen to a dude from Bomb Beach. So these clues are going to pinpoint to Victorians. Okay. Now moving on to my second pass, okay, which is the real important one. I'm reading it much more closely now. I'm looking for words, phrases, sections that can help me pinpoint these arguments. I'm looking for techniques, I'm looking for connotations, I'm looking for structure, all that juicy stuff. So, what a waste. Well, waste has a lot of connotations. It sounds like, something that's just been discarded without a lot of maybe forethought, quite carelessly. Shutting down the Hazelwood power plant is because it burned. This is like repetition here. It burned the coal to heat the water to make the steam to drive the generators. Now I don't know what technique that is. I'd probably go with repetition if I were to use something off the list, because it's kind of a repetition of like sentence structure or word structure. It's like creating this little sequence. You do this to do this to do this to do this to make our electricity. So that could be something that I could kind of write about, and it's probably positioning us to recognize that electricity is not this like complicated magical thing. It's actually a pretty simple process. What else have we got? With 21st century technology, we can produce electricity cheaper than with coal and with no greenhouse gases. So you got an appeal to hip pocket nerve or an appeal to financial security with this idea of cheapness. And we've got here with no greenhouse gases, that is an appeal to like environmental consciousness or an appeal to a modern audience's desire to protect the environment. And you're not going to find that one on your persuasive techniques list, but there are going to be students out there who identify more nuanced appeals that authors are making. So if you can do that, do it. That would be amazing. If we move on, how, just because it's a question mark doesn't make it a rhetorical question. That's a genuine question. All right, he's like setting us up and engaging us as the audience by directing a question straight at us. How do we do this? And then he gives us the answer straight away by converting and modifying the Hazelwood plant to use nuclear tech instead of coal, and educating the public to realise modern technology has made it safe to use. So here, alright, we could talk about his purpose. Part of his purpose is educating the public, I think, because he goes on to explain how this modern technology, this modern nuclear technology, is safe to use, despite what people may think. In this sentence, accidents of the past were all from nature's disasters and human stupidity. The words that jump out at me are accidents, disasters, stupidity. In terms of accidents, he's kind of minimizing any of the nuclear kind of incidents that have happened in the past, because an accident is it's something that happens it's something that happens unintentionally. Okay. And he's kind of shifting blame from the technology to the natural disaster, or human error, human stupidity. Okay, so this isn't, in terms of argumentation and the way he constructs this argument, he's shifting the blame from the technology to other factors, natural disasters and human stupidity. Why is he doing that? Well, he's doing that to kind of make readers think that the technology is more safe and make readers think that, okay, this is something that if we were to do it correctly, we could kind of integrate and use quite effectively. Next, we've got the US powers most of its big ships with nuclear energy and has for 20 years. Okay, in terms of argument, he is creating or is kind of giving this idea credibility by referring to the US. Okay, because if a world-leading superpower is confident enough to use this nuclear technology, why aren't we as Australians? It's kind of like a common sense thing. And the fact that he says for 20 years, well, it's enhancing that credibility. And he's saying, well, if they've done it for so long, like surely the technology should be at a point where it's a viable option. Uranium's in plentiful supply. Again, common sense. We've got the resources to create nuclear tech. Why not do it? We even sell it overseas. We've even got an over surplus of it. It is cheap fuel to use, and our electricity would be less expensive than coal. Okay, so here is his argument kind of quite specifically. Okay, nuclear energy is a cheaper alternative, and it's a safe one. Therefore, we should be updating the plant, not scrapping it. Of course, the current suppliers of electricity will fight tooth and nail to keep monopolies intact. Well, that is a really great sentence. Okay, you've got fight tooth and nail. Okay, kind of a cliche being used to portray the suppliers in kind of maybe even in like an animalistic light. They're quite aggressive in their fight to keep this technology. And using that word monopolies makes us think of that little dude on the Monopoly box, fat cat companies who are only interested in their own profit margins and not interested in, enhancing the lives of the public. But even this desal plant can be run by nuclear energy. Remember, we stopped using horses when we realised petrol was safe to use when handled correctly. So we've got restatement of that safety argument, restatement of what we had earlier. So that's I guess what I would be kind of looking at, or some of the things I would pick out. My last step is comparing. Try to answer some of the following questions. Are the author's arguments logical? Are they emotional? Are they based on their reputation? I have no idea who D.A. Stelzner is, so it's definitely not based on his reputation. Some of his arguments are maybe grounded in kind of the credibility of other groups that he kind of calls upon to provide his argument with credibility. They're not really emotional. I'm seeing a lot of like common sense appeals here. So I'd say that the majority of his argumentation is a logical approach. Why destroy something, the plant, when we can simply upgrade it, and that would have more beneficial impact than what it was before. I'm making a really clear call here about the type of argument being used. What assumptions do they make? Well, he's kind of like assuming that the people care about the environment. A lot of readers aren't going to care, so he might be kind of losing interest there, maybe from readers who don't care about the environment. Maybe. Who do you think the audience is? Well, we've established that it's kind of Melburnians, Victorians. Highlight any major similarities you can see between this text and the next. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to read through this one, but your similarities. It looks like the age, Victorian governments. We've got a similar audience. Once upon a big dirty dinosaur named Hazel chewed up coal. Well, it looks like they both kind of address Hazel as something outdated. So that's something I could talk about, or write about, sorry. Solar thermal plants operate in other countries. We do not, maybe I can compare the